Good morning. This is Frater Ralph with Hermetic Temple Radio, and this is another part of the series, The Lost Teaching of Jesus. And the Lost Teachings of Jesus, we're not really exploring new documents per se, although I do like to sometimes refer back to the Gospel of Thomas, which is a non-canonical gospel. But for the most part, I just like to operate out of the standard four Gospels that everybody has access to in any good copy of the Bible. So what we do look at, though, what has become lost, I believe, over the centuries and the millennia, is a heart set. You know, just a heart set where we open ourselves up to the divine source. And we open ourselves up to the person of Jesus the Christ, rather than our own predetermined prejudices about who Jesus was and who Jesus is. The world is so full of people who think they can speak for Jesus. What we need are more people in this world who are willing to listen in the silence of their hearts to the Christ speaking to them within. That simple art of listening is what has caused so many of the teachings of Jesus to become lost. It's not necessarily because somebody's gone around burning the books or destroying key gospels or ancient documents that go back to the first century and have been lost to the present age. It's not really that. This information has become lost because we see it in plain sight in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and especially the Gospel of Matthew and the section called the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7. But we just don't want to hear it for what it says. And part of that is because we have become conditioned to think in terms that Jesus probably was never familiar with and never would have thought of. Terms that I'm going to call churchianity. There is a difference between churchianity and Christianity, and then full-blown, unhindered spirituality. And we are going to be getting into that this morning in the next hour, right after this short song by Burnshee Thornside, a little instrumental piece called Spanish Brass and Fury, and then we'll be right back to discuss churchianity. Churchianity. Let's start out with that, because I think that as we look at the process of spiritual growth, most people start out at the stage of Churchianity. And that is different from Christianity, but most people don't see it. So what Churchianity is all the doctrines and the dogmas and the teachings that you were raised with in one particular church. And for the most part, when a person is raised in a particular church and they're taught that this is the way we do things because, it's the tradition, it's the practice, it's the standard practice, we tend to think that that's the way all Christians should operate. And sometimes, well, I won't say sometimes, many times, especially in churches that call themselves Bible-believing churches or, Scripture, very hardcore Bible and Scripture churches, they will tend to think that the way they do things is taken right out of the Bible, which anybody can read and interpret, the way they interpret it, and that this is just the way it's been done for the last 2,000 years. The way that we do things is just the standard way that it's done. And it's only after we've had the chance to talk to other people from other Christian traditions that we begin to realize there are a lot of other different opinions out there as to what standard church practice should be and what the main teachings of Jesus are. But first we have to kind of break through the blinders of Churchianity, that belief that the way we do things today is exactly the same way it's been done for 2,000 years. When I was first called to be a Christian minister to a Disciples of Christ church, we lived next door to the newspaper editor who owned the local newspaper in our community, and he was also a pretty hardcore Baptist. And we were just chit-chatting, like neighbors do. And he was mentioning that his church was having a baptism that Sunday. And I said, well, that's interesting. Yeah, we're having a baptism, in a few weeks. And, I'd kind of like to see how you people, your church does baptism. So he said, oh, yeah, we just take our person right on down to the river, and we hold his head under and bring him back up. We do it in the river. No baptistry. We do it just the way Jesus did it. And I kind of smiled because, I knew that, well, do we really know how Jesus performed baptism? I think we know how some people performed baptism back in the first century. And I think in the Gospel of John, it is recorded that Jesus baptized some of his disciples. And the word in Greek used for baptism also means to submerge. So that's the whole idea of, immersion. But were there other forms of baptism? Did Jesus really practice baptism that much? It's pretty interesting that in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew and Luke, I don't believe we have any reference to Jesus baptizing. Now in the Gospel of John, gospel that was written, rather late, probably late 1st century or early 2nd century, that's the only gospel that we have which mentions Jesus baptizing his disciples. So when we make the claim we baptize just like Jesus baptized, we have to stop and think, do we really? How do we know? But we say things like that, not because we know for certain with any degree of certitude, but we assume that our churchianity that we have been raised with is the same as Christianity. And there are many other different examples that we can give of churchianity that becomes confused with Christianity. The sacraments. Okay, hey, sacrament. How many churches out there have sacraments? You can tell I'm an old Catholic boy, so yeah, I was raised with the sacraments. Baptists weren't raised with sacraments. The Lutherans, what do they have? They don't have the sacraments, they have the ordinances, something like that. But yeah, different points of view. But what about the celebration of the Lord's Supper? Or, from the Catholic perspective, the celebration of the Eucharist, or Holy Communion. When we're talking about communion, or the Lord's Supper, besides, the difference in terminology of sacrament or ordinance or, just the Lord's Supper, we have a difference right off the bat. We have the question of when should this celebration be celebrated? How often? Now the Catholics, I've got a phone going off here I can't answer right now. There we go. Yeah, I had a little distraction going on. From the Catholic perspective, we celebrated communion once a week on Sunday. And actually, if you went to church during the week too, you could be doing communion every day. As a matter of fact, from the Catholic perspective, they had to make a law, a regulation, let's say. I'm turning my phone off here. I sound distracted, it's because I am. There we go. Now I'm back ready. Yeah, they actually had to pass a restriction, because in the Catholic tradition, people assumed that if they went to communion as often as possible and celebrated the Lord's Supper as often as they could, that they'd be holier, that somehow they'd be spiritually better off. So there were actually people out there who were running around from one church to the next, not just having communion every day, but trying to see if they could get it 3 times a day, or 4 times a day, or hourly. And in some communities that had a strong Catholic presence, you could probably arrange things where you could be celebrating communion once an hour. And the church just had to pass a restriction that said, no, it's a good thing to do, but don't overdo it. Just limit yourself to once a day. Now that's from the Catholic perspective of churchianity. Now what about the Baptists? Now some Baptist church, we have a wide variety of Baptist churches. Some Baptist churches will celebrate it, maybe a couple times a year. Some will celebrate once a month, and it'll be a very special time, and they'll have a special service just dedicated towards the Lord's Supper. Certain Pentecostalist churches celebrate it once a year, and that is around the time of the Passover, the time when Jesus actually sat down and broke bread with his disciples and said, "This is my body. Take all and eat, for this is the body that will be given up for you and for many." And we have these different points of views about how often communion should be celebrated. And oddly enough, you see, the way I was raised, I thought that this was biblical. So anybody could open up their Bible and see that, this is the way they should be doing things. But people from the Baptist perspective can say the same thing. The way we do it is biblical, and anybody should be able to see it. And the Pentecostals, or the Assemblies of God people, they can also break open their Bible and point to chapter and verse that says, this is the way they did it. And throughout the history of Christianity, we've had various Christians arguing over churchianity and pointing to Bible verses justifying their practices and saying this is the way it should be done. And right there is a weakness, because the Bible is a good book for guidance, for spiritual growth, for spiritual development, for inspiration. But the Bible was never written as a strict history book. It wasn't written as a strict book of theology or doctrines and dogmas and rituals and practices. It wasn't a book that was written by just one author. It's a book that was written over a period of hundreds of years with many different authors, all inspired by the same Holy Spirit, but all representing different communities, different faith communities with different needs and different worldviews and different interpretations of the same event that was the life of Jesus Christ. And so when we pick up the Bible and we expect to read from start to finish one harmonious story of God's love for humankind, we eventually find ourselves disappointed, because we find that it is not one harmonious, grand story from start to finish. It is many different stories being told from different perspectives, similar stories, but stories that are being given by different communities, looking at different angles of the big picture. And so what we have is not, one harmonious story, but rather lots of bits and pieces of many different stories from different communities, from different points of view, that have been edited together and printed as Holy Scripture. And so when we read the Bible, to try to read it as a modern day book of history, or as a scientific textbook, or as a book of doctrines and dogmas and what have you, we do it a disservice. It wasn't really intended to tell us what the only normative practice was. What it is written by inspired people telling us their side of the story. And different communities had different sides of the story. The community that produced the Gospel of Matthew was essentially a Jewish community, and they saw things through the lens of Jesus as the prophet that was greater than Moses, and they were people that still practiced their Jewish faith, but they also incorporated, certain elements as they understood it from the teaching of Jesus the Christ. Then you have the community that produced the Gospel of Luke. And this community was not primarily Jewish. It was primarily Gentile. And they came to the table not with a Jewish understanding of the world or a Jewish worldview. They came to the table with more of a pagan worldview, a Roman worldview, a Greek worldview. And they saw and understood things differently. And so when they gave their understanding of the story of Jesus Christ, they gave it from their perspective, their Gentile, pagan perspective. And then if you look at the Gospel of John, the most beautifully written, the best Greek of any gospel in the New Testament. I think it's got to be the Gospel of John, the most well done, the most thought out, and just the most artistically done book of the four Gospels. That came from a community that was primarily, I'm going to say, a Jewish community, but a Jewish community that found itself at odds with the other sections of the Jewish community. The Gospel of John was produced by a community of Messianic Jews that believed very strongly that Jesus was the Messiah that was foretold to come. And they found themselves at odds with the other Jews that did not accept Jesus as the Messiah. In the first century, there were a lot of messiahs. We tend to think that there was just one, and his name was Jesus. But there were a lot of other people claiming to be the Messiah. And a lot of them had a lot of popular support too. One of these was Bar Kokhba, and he led a revolution of the Jewish people against Rome, claiming to be the Messiah that would liberate Israel from Roman control. And he said that if people wanted to liberate their land, they had to follow him. And he did not really put up with people that were claiming other messiahs rather than himself. So during this time, when a lot of the Jews were following Bar Kokhba as the Messiah, those Jews that followed Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah found themselves shut out of the synagogues and persecuted, at least to a certain extent. And they had to separate themselves from longtime friends, family members. They found themselves to be outcast from their traditional community. And that is the perspective that the Gospel of John is written from. So again, a different worldview, a different way of seeing things, different way of understanding. And there, right in those three Gospels, we see the basis for early churchianity back in the first century, because what these writers were doing, they were telling their story. This is who Jesus is for us. This is how we practice our Christianity. And different churches had different customs. There were similarities, yes, but there were also differences. And unfortunately, from the first century onward to the 21st century, we tend to place more emphasis on the differences than we do on the similarities. I'm going to stop right there and play another song, this one by Mark Cook, called The Promise Highway, and we'll be back with a look at Christianity.
Some of you may call me a dreamer. Well, go and say what you will, but you find I won't be hanging around with the pain that I feel. Maybe then I can find what I'm looking for, and maybe I won't be feeling so blue. Hey, hey, as I head down that promised highway, all this time I've been thinking it through. I'm gonna head down the promised highway. There's nothing more I can do. I leave behind this ratchet old town here. I'm gonna find something new. I don't need nobody telling me what's wrong or what's right. I'll just keep on driving down that highway till I'm clean out of sight. Maybe then I can find what I'm looking for. I won't be feeling so blue. Hey, hey, as I drive down that promised highway, all this time I've been thinking it through.
So now we need to finish up with Churchianity, and then we're going to compare that to Christianity, and then go on to spirituality. With Churchianity, many people are convinced that their form of worship, their way of thinking, their way of doing things is really the right way, and the only way that things should be done. And when you get people locked in to that level of churchianity, thinking that for them it's Christianity, and it should be that way for everybody else as well, then it creates problems. Especially if you get, a Roman Catholic together with a Southern Baptist. In my own family, back in the 1930s, 1940s, up until about, I'd say, the 1950s, we were a very strong Roman Catholic family. We had a few priests in the family. I myself was going on to seminary to become a priest at one point in time. And we've had a few nuns, I believe. So, yeah, over the years, a very strong Roman Catholic perspective on things. And then, I would say, I believe it was the 1950s, we had a member of the family that just got into a really bad car accident. He was driving drunk. He almost killed a little girl through drunk driving, and it shook him. And at that point, he began to seek out help. and he wandered into a Baptist church. And for him, converting to the Baptist church with his alcoholism, with his worldview at that time, it worked. It worked beautifully. That man transformed into a warm, loving human being, and he found an understanding of God in that Baptist church that worked for him. And looking back, I can see how making that change in his religion, in his life at that time, was the right move for him. Now, back in the 1950s, the Catholic side of the family did not see it that way. They saw it as he was betraying the faith. He was leaving, oh my God, the one true church. How many times have we heard that in Churchianity? We are the one true church. There is no salvation outside of the one true church. And with us being raised as Catholics, the one true church was the Roman Catholic Church. And by God, there is no salvation outside of the Roman Catholic Church. And they took that pretty damn serious. It sounds funny when you put it that way, but yeah, we took that really seriously. And at the point of departure, where half of the family started going into the Baptist church, and half of the family remained in the Roman Catholic Church, we heard things being said that really don't make any sense right now, but back then it seemed like the right thing to say. Stuff like, "I will say my Catholic prayers to save your Baptist soul." Not really a very good example of living in harmony, is it? Not a very good example of family unity either. Definitely not Christianity at its best. But we were blind. We were blind. Some had different levels of blindness, especially those that were saying, "I will say my Catholic prayers to save your Baptist soul." Yeah, that takes a lot of blindness now looking back. But at the time it seemed like the right thing to do, the right thing to say. Because the understanding was, this is Christianity. This is the one true faith. This is the one true church. And if you leave it, your soul is in jeopardy. And people that believe that their Churchianity is the same as the teachings of Jesus, you got to take that really serious. And it causes conflict, causes confusion. And my uncle and his wife left the Roman Catholic faith. They became very strong Baptists. And for them, it worked. Now, would that same move have worked for anybody else? No. Somebody else with a different worldview, with different problems, with different perspectives on things, would go into a Baptist church and just think, this just doesn't work for me. I attended many Baptist services. Some of them I thought were quite good. Others left me shaking my head, scratching my head, and walking outside thinking, this just doesn't work for me. Because people are different. People have different spiritual needs. People are at different levels of spiritual growth. And some churches work very well at one level of spiritual growth, and other churches work very well at another level of spiritual growth. And some churches try to acknowledge that, yeah, different people are at different levels of spirituality, and we have to try to work with all of them. And that can be a challenge, because the people who are at, let's say, without being prejudiced or judgmental, people who are at a lower level of spiritual growth will tend to think that their spirituality is normative and that everybody should be thinking this way, or everybody should be operating, from this level of spirituality. And then people at a, let's say, again, without trying to be prejudiced, people who are operating from a higher level of spiritual growth can tend to be thinking that, okay, this is the normative level. This is, the real view that everybody should have. And sometimes they can be consumed with spiritual pride, and they can think that, yeah, I'm at a higher level of spiritual growth, and so I need to help all these other people ascend to my level of spiritual growth. And you try yanking people up to where you're at when they're not ready for it, thinking that because it's right for you, because it's good for you, it should be good for everybody else. But it isn't. And what comes into play in churchianity is pride and ego and hurt feelings and the whole gamut of human emotions. Some of these emotions we tend to think of in a positive way, like love, compassion, care, trying to understand, positive things like that. And then there are the more negative emotions like anger and greed and pride. And spiritual pride can be one of the more damning forms of pride that there is. Because when we fall into spiritual pride, we think we are servants of God, doing God's will, and whatever we do, whatever we say, is justified. We are God's spokesman. And we can say extremely hurtful, stupid things out of that pride. Things like, I will say my Catholic prayer to save your Baptist soul. I would never think I would hear a family member today saying that, partially because I think we only have one or two Catholics left in the family. The old school has died out. Others of the younger ones have converted to other churches. Some are now atheists. Some are Baptists. Some are Pentecostals. We have a pretty good mix in the family. But what we have learned is that churchianity can be a very negative thing when you're talking about family unity. And when we're talking about the wider human family, it's the same, only far, far more intense. I forget how many different Christian churches we have in the United States. I've heard estimates of over 1,000. Some say 10,000, and even higher than that. And all look at the same Bible for their inspiration, and out of that they craft their doctrines and their dogmas, thinking that that's the way it should be, that's the right way. And each pointing fingers at the other church, saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. That's not the way we see things. That's not the way we do things. And what we need to learn in this world that can be divided by churchianity we need to learn about Christianity. What is it that unites us, or should unite us, as followers of the Christ? We need to say right off the bat, we are not going to have the same understanding of the Christ. When I say Christ, some people are going to be thinking Jesus. Other people will be thinking, the human Jesus. Others will think the resurrected, glorified Jesus. Others will be thinking more along the lines of Christ's consciousness, the Christ within, the indwelling presence of the Christ. And these are all, I'm going to say, valid points of view, depending upon your level of understanding, depending upon your spiritual growth. But we're not all going to see things the same way. So what we have to do is we need to focus on what is important. What are the teachings of Jesus that we can all pretty much agree on, and then focus on those teachings. And then further, think of what are the teachings of Jesus that we really need to work on today in the 21st century with our world. Okay, going to hell in a handbasket, I think, would be a fair thing to say. With a world that is so desperately in need of love, of reconciliation, of harmony, of healing. Aren't these the qualities that we should be focusing on in our various churches? Instead of pointing fingers at one another, going to holy war with one another, as it were, saying that we are God's true people and you are not. We do things right and you don't. Shouldn't we rather be reaching out to one another in love? When we read the gospel stories, what is it that Jesus says as he is preparing to leave his disciples? Love one another as I have loved you. And how did Jesus love his early disciples? To the point of death. To the point that when they came for him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter tried to intercede for Jesus and drew his sword to stand in between Jesus and the temple guard that had gone out to arrest Jesus that night, Jesus said to Peter, "Put away your sword. He who lives by the sword shall die by the sword." And then he said to the temple guard, "I am the Jesus that you seek. Take me. Leave them alone. Love one another as I have loved you." Jesus could have escaped his fate. He could have ran off. He could have had Peter standing in between him and the temple guard. He could have had Peter sacrifice himself while Jesus and the rest of the disciples escaped through the back door, so to speak, through the back way. When we're talking about the Garden of Gethsemane, it's interesting. There was a back way out of that place. Jesus didn't take it. Jesus stepped forward, told Peter, "Step aside, put down your sword." And then he said, "I am the one you are looking for. Take me." That is the kind of love that we need to display in our contemporary world. A kind of love that doesn't point the finger of blame, but truly tries to look out for one another. Surely we will fail from time to time. There are always failures in love, And for those who are trying to grow spiritually, those failures of love really suck. And not just when you experience them from somebody else, when you personally fail to love somebody as you should. It sucks. But that's what we need to work on, I think. A form of Christianity, and you can call it whatever. It exists in all churches. But a form of Christianity that focuses on love, focuses on reconciliation, focuses on healing, focuses on the teachings of Jesus that can be found in the Sermon on the Mount. A form of Christianity that is very weak when it comes to self-righteousness, but very strong when it comes to love. And we can build it. It exists already. There are a lot of very beautiful people out there who call themselves Christian that operate from this point of view. And they will have fellowship with anybody. They don't care what you are. You know, if you're a Baptist or a Catholic or a Pentecostal or a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist, they don't care. They see you as a fellow child of God, and they treat you as a brother, even though previously they may never have known you. But just that level of love that is just so radical that it transcends all the other barriers. We have our churchianities strongly set. Eventually, though, if our hearts are open, when we're ready to grow, when we're ready to develop, that churchianity will begin to express itself into what I'm going to call Christianity. And this is a view of the teachings of Jesus that focuses on the positive attributes, that focuses on, that idea that we should love one another as Jesus loves us, as Jesus loved his first disciples. And when we focus on that agape love, that pure, unconditional, unmerited love, a form of love that says, even if you screw me over, even if you screw up badly, I will still love you. I'll watch out so you don't screw me over again, but I will still love you. That's what we need in our contemporary world. That form of Christianity. I see spiritual growth as a process of growing from our previous understandings to a new level of understanding, and then from there going to other levels of understanding, on and on and on. I'm not exactly sure where it ends, but it is an ongoing process. And it's a process of transcending our previous beliefs, our previous views, our previous theologies, and being able to open up to one another, not as Baptists or Catholics, or even as Christians, but opening up to one another as fellow children of the divine source, as true human beings, true children of the universe, of the divine source, of God, however you understand that. And when we reach that level, then we are on a spiritual path that will know no end. Just constant growth from separation to unity. I'm going to take a break, play a song here called Down with the Blues, And then we're going to wrap this up by talking about full-blown spirituality.
Since
Well, yeah, here we're talking about the Baptists, and I just it kind of remind me of being in church with some black Baptists there as a white Catholic boy. I tell you, I I find all that stuff refreshing and neat. And hey, variety is good. And that leads us into the talk on full-blown spirituality. Life is a process of growth. When we're first born, we see ourselves as members of a nuclear family. Mother, child, father, maybe a brother or sister in the mix, and then grandmother, grandfather, aunts, uncles. They become our world. And then from there we tend to expand out to, a greater tribe, other relatives that, second cousins, second great uncles, great grandmothers, great grandfathers, shirt tail relatives that nobody really seems to know how we're related, but somehow we figure, yeah, that guy's family. He's your great uncle's aunt's cousin's second grandfather. The theory of relativity that we've all tried to go through trying to figure out who is that guy that keeps showing up at family reunions. I don't know, but hey, that's just Bob. And then from there we go on to more of a, I guess, less of a tribal understanding to more of a community understanding, folks that live in my town, folks who live in my city, and then from there we expand out to folks who live in my country. And at that point, people tend to be fixated. And we think, okay, our country is the best, we're number one, and everybody should bow down to us. Sometimes it's expressed that way. But what we need to do, I think anyway, from my perspective, and this is not saying that everybody should have that perspective, is learn to grow beyond that sense of tribalism and nationalism to where we can see other people and accept them for who they are and accept them as members of our extended human family and reach out in love to these other individuals, these other people. And from there we can continue to grow in full-blown spirituality based on love, to extend compassion and care to other animals, other beings on this world, and just become radical lovers. All religions teach love in one form or another. It's not a very popular topic. It's not necessarily what you hear when you go to church every Sunday, or synagogue on Saturdays, or or to the mosques or the temples on whatever day of the week you meet. It's not that popular of a message, but it is there. And it is radically overlooked and underappreciated. We'll talk and fight about so many other things, like how often we should have communion, or should we baptize by full immersion, or is sprinkling a baby with water baptism enough? Should you only baptize babies, or should you baptize adults and babies? Should you only baptize adults? We have all these little doctrinal issues that we focus on and argue about. But the issue of love, the most healing thing that we can have, that we can do, that we can participate in, this healing love of the divine source, is overlooked. God's love for the world is something that we put on the back burner, and instead we focus on doctrinal issues or other matters like nationality or racism, sexism. There's a whole variety of things that we put primary emphasis on, while at the same time forgetting about love. And in what I'm going to call full-blown spirituality, this comes about as an awakening. An awakening which can come as a product of meditation, or it can come through a life tragedy, a major life tragedy. Perhaps something that should have killed you but didn't, and it opens your eyes. And instead of understanding yourself as a Baptist, or as an American, or as John Doe the plumber, you begin to see yourself as a child of the divine, and you begin to see other beings around you as fellow children of the divine. And when you reach this level of understanding, it's a very beautiful place to be, but it comes with its own set of challenges. Sometimes, even though you see other people as fellow children of the divine, even though you see other animals as fellow children of God, there are times when they really get under your skin. There are times when you just don't want to be bothered. There are times when you could just be so full of anger that you just don't want to deal with somebody. But then you stop, you breathe, you commune with the divine source of your understanding, and you let all that anger go. And you continue on to try to live a life of love as best as you can. There's an early Christian document called the Didache. It's a book that was lost for quite a few ages. It was rediscovered, I think, a couple hundred years ago and translated from the Greek into English. And it, too, is a collection of teachings of what it was, from the perspective of at least 3 different Christian communities, what it was to be a follower of Jesus the Christ. And that beautiful little book starts out with the hardest teaching of all. It says, you shall love all. You shall not have an enemy. You shall pray for your enemy. You shall fast for your enemies. You shall not kill. And in the language of the Didache, I take that to be almost a strict command. Thou shalt not kill. It doesn't make exceptions like we do today for self-defense. It is a teaching that is very, very difficult. And in the opening chapters, the Didache acknowledges that this is a difficult teaching. And it has a passage that says, if you would be perfect, keep all of these commandments. Do that, and you are perfect. But then it goes on in the next line. If you are not perfect, and you are not able to keep all of these commandments, then what you are able to do, that do. When we think of spirituality and Christianity and Churchianity, we tend to think that you have to be perfect, or as perfect as possible, in your observance of your religion or your spiritual path. That passage from the Didache, I always remember that and use that as a reminder. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try. There is an element of grace. Whether you believe in one Christian church or another Christian church or no church at all, there is a level of grace that is given freely to all. And that is the grace that says, try your best to lead a life of love. And if you are not capable of perfect love, the level of love that you are capable of, that do. A baby isn't born a nuclear scientist. There are a series of steps that a baby takes to grow from the level of a newborn babe to a nuclear scientist or a brain surgeon or a plumber or a garbage collector. Life is a series of steps that we take. And it's the same with spirituality. We are not born great saints. You know, we are not born Gandhis or Peters or Pauls or doubting Thomases. We live, we grow, we learn, and eventually we become the people that we are intended to be, or the people that we want to be, want to become. We tend to think of ourselves as human beings. We are actually human becomers. And we need to learn to have patience with ourselves, because the level which we are at right now is not the level, hopefully not the level that we will die at. We will grow. We will make mistakes, but we will learn from those mistakes. And we will grow into more loving, more beautiful, better children of God. It doesn't happen overnight. And making the ascent to full-blown spirituality is something that everybody is capable of. That point at which we see everyone and everything as a reflection of the divine source, and everything that happens to us in life we accept as a life lesson. And we try to learn from it. We try to grow with it. And everybody has a certain level of spirituality. Even when I was stuck at the level of churchianity, thinking that there is no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church, I still had a very deep spirituality. People have a sense of spirituality, whether they are at the level of churchianity or Christianity or full-blown interfaith, non-denominational, non-sectarian spirituality. It's just a matter of taking one level of spirituality, living with it, working with it, learning from it, and allowing it to grow to the next level, and then the next level, and then the next level. And trusting that the divine source is with us every step of the way. Not just with us as a person walking side by side with us, but with us from the perspective that the kingdom of heaven is within you. That understanding that the divine source is with you because it is within you. That's a level of awakening that not everybody has. Not everybody will even be able to accept that when they first hear it. But once you learn to grow with it, to meditate, to pray, to do your spiritual work in whatever form that may take, then you begin to open your eyes to the wider reality. And when that comes, then all the barriers tend to break down. We don't see one another as Catholics or as Baptists or as Methodists. I once met a very beautiful man who was part of a interfaith Christian fellowship, and he was sitting there telling everybody, I hate to admit this, but there was a time when I thought that God only heard the prayers of a Methodist. And there were a lot of Pentecostals and Baptists and Catholics and Unitarians who were sitting there at that conference laughing and clapping their hands because at one point in time they felt the same way from their perspective. When we learn to see ourselves not as just Baptists or Methodists or Christians or Americans, but rather as children of the divine source, fellow children of the divine, then beautiful things can happen. But again, it's not a process that happens all at once. We have to be patient with ourselves and just grow in that understanding. Well, this is Frater Ralph signing off. If you'd like to make a donation to help support these podcasts, to help the growth of our spiritual outreach, which is Temple of the Infinite Universe, you can go to our website at excuse me. Oh, I think I need to take a break. But you can make a donation to help support us at www.hermetictemple.com. And go ahead, and we appreciate all your support. We especially appreciate your interest in these podcasts. Good to see a lot of people downloading these and just hanging out with us for an hour and a half, however long we go, and fellowshipping with us, as it were, through the airwaves. But if you'd like to make a donation, that's how you can. And I'm going to close out here with Universe Acceptable by Ash Gainley. And until we meet again through the airwaves, I wish you all a blessed day of spiritual discovery. Thanks for tuning in.
Like a summer's day, you questioned life and lost your faith. You needed to believe in something that your eyes had never seen. And now you found that you can't find the answers to the questions that you had in mind. It's like a dial tone, no one's on the line, and now you're feeling so alone. Universe acceptable in your mind? Is the universe acceptable in your mind? Is the universe acceptable in your mind? Or do you need to see an explanation for the mystery? Trust your heart, it knows the way. In yourself, you need some faith. Don't listen to the crowd. No one's got this whole thing figured out. Listen to the voice inside, the inner self you long denied. The day that you were born, you were given everything you need to carry on. Is the universe acceptable in your mind? Is universe acceptable in your mind? Or do you need to see an explanation for the mystery? How many bright suns shine upon the lucky ones who wander? How far have we come? And will we go before we'll die? Yeah, the hardest thing it seems to me is letting go of all beliefs. Is the universe acceptable in your mind? Is the universe acceptable in your mind? Is the universe acceptable in your mind? Or do you need to see an explanation for the mystery?